Well, now to that long-awaited debate. But first, some background notes. When Professor Ian Plimer's outright denial of man-made global warming was championed in the UK Spectator magazine earlier this year after the publication of his book, Heaven and Earth, in Britain, the magazine's editor promoted the idea of a great public debate in London between Professor Plimer and the Guardian's George Monbiot. Monbiot is a renowned champion of climate science. In the end, George Monbiot's key condition for the debate, that Professor Plimer first answer in writing a series of questions about claims in his book, was not met. The debate was cancelled. And tonight, with no preconditions, George Monbiot joins us in Copenhagen and Ian Plimer is here in our Sydney studio. Thanks to both of you for being there.
Thank you.
And let's start with George Monbiot, because you recently wrote, "There's no point in denying it, we're losing. Climate change denial is spreading like a contagious disease." Now, coming from you, that's rather a startling conclusion. How did you reach it?
Well, the surveys show that large numbers of people have effectively ceased to believe that man-made global warming is taking place. And this is profoundly ironic because at the same time, the evidence has hardened up to a startling degree. And the science of man-made global warming is now as solid as the science linking smoking with lung cancer and HIV with AIDS. And it seems to me that the harder the science becomes, the more people fall into denial because they simply don't want to face the writing that's now on the wall.
It's odd that you should say that, because if it's true that this is what's happening with the general public, it's not filtering up to the leaders that are on their way to Copenhagen, evidently.
Yes, I think this is one of the rare instances where governments are continuing to do the right thing, even if in some cases it might be politically costly for them. Now, the reason governments have taken that position is that they have scientific advisors who follow the science very closely, who understand what the science is saying, and are extremely alarmed by the implications and have managed to express that alarm to their leaders. And the leaders know that if they don't take serious action on climate change, then we're going to get into a situation which will be extremely dangerous for many of the world's people.
Ian Plimer, let me bring you in now. Is that a fair assessment, do you think, that what's going on is that there is a movement, a shift away from belief in climate change in the general public, that it's not at the leadership level of governments, because scientific advisors are telling their governments this is actually happening?
I spend a lot of my time in the outbacks with average people, talking to people. There has been a huge movement, and I don't think governments are in contact with it, but what I think is happening is governments just cannot resist the opportunity to tax us more, to set up huge bureaucracies, and this is what Copenhagen's about. It's not about science, it's not about morality, it's not about the third world, it's about money, and it's about governments putting their hands in our pockets, taking out our money and having to go through sets of sticky fingers to end up disappearing somewhere else in the world. And backing that up is science, which certainly we've seen from the University of East Anglia, is at best really dodgy.
George Monbiot, well, that's the elephant. That's the elephant in the room, isn't it? The leaked emails from the climatic research unit of the University of East Anglia. Let's talk about the impact first that's actually had on this debate, because you've written, once again, no one has been as badly let down by the revelations in these emails as those of us who have championed the science.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what those emails show are correspondence which I believe is unscientific, in that they have sought to suppress data, and it has not been released properly to the public, and I think that's completely contrary to the spirit of science. Science has to be open and it has to be transparent. What the emails do not show is that global warming is a hoax and a scam and a con and all the rest of it, as people like Ian Plimer suggest. What they possibly do is to raise a question about one or two out of several hundred lines of evidence that man-made global warming is taking place, and raise questions possibly about the integrity of 3 or 4 scientists. But there are tens of thousands of scientists involved in climate change whose evidence stands and has not been affected by this. And what Ian has been proposing is a standard old conspiracy theory, a conspiracy theory which would have to involve tens of thousands of people if it were to be true, that all all the scientists and all the governments are getting together to make up a completely unfounded story about climate change in order to tax us, disregarding the fact, of course, that if governments are serious about this and do pursue it through Copenhagen, they lose vast revenues in terms of the money that they make from the fossil fuel industry. They have to reshape the global economy in a way that most of them are deeply reluctant to do. And let me tell you that if this is a great global conspiracy, it's a hell of an ineffective one, because these guys can't even make a firm agreement on climate change, let alone pursue it so that they can all extract billions and billions in taxes, as Ian Plimer suggests.
Ian Plimer, do you actually regard this as evidence of a global conspiracy?
Not at all, and I've never used those words at all. What we see with these emails are mafia-type bullying tactics on editors to stop them publishing work which is somewhat different. We see source codes of computers which are designed to change results. We see this cooking of the evidence. We see conspiracies by using words such as tricks. That's about all we would see. Now, the scientists involved are a handful of the major scientists who are driving this agenda. These are the major scientists who are behind the IPCC. And this UN conference in Copenhagen is based on what those major scientists have given as evidence. We see in those emails that one scientist has got $25 million from 55 research grants from frightening us witless. This is Jones. And the Jones and Wigley record is the reference standard for the IPCC. Okay. Now, we have to say that that standard has been contaminated, it has been polluted. That is not a conspiracy. The emails show that, the reports show that, the source code shows that. All right, this is the biggest scientific fraud in history.
The biggest scientific fraud in history. All right, let me throw that back to George Monbiot. And George, just hang on for 1 second. Let me quote to you, because you've written about this yourself. One of the worst emails. It is from the head of the unit, Phil Jones. He was just talked about there. He's trying to make sure several papers don't make it into the IPCC report, and he says, Kevin and I will keep them out somehow, even if we have to redefine what the peer-reviewed literature is. Is there any excuse at all for what he said there?
I don't believe there is. No, I don't believe there is an excuse for that, and I condemn in the strongest terms some of the sentiments expressed in those emails. But to suggest that this is the whole of the IPCC infrastructure we're talking about, these are all the scientists who count, is simply preposterous. And I have to say that Ian is a fine one to talk about scientific fraud. His book is filled with fabrication after fabrication, simple untruths repeated again and again, and even when people point out to him that he has just made up the facts that he states in his book, he keeps restating them. Take, for example, his claim that human beings produce more carbon dioxide than volcanoes. Now, the US Geological Survey shows that human beings, he suggests that volcanoes produce more carbon dioxide than human beings. The US Geological Survey shows that human beings produce 130 times more carbon dioxide than volcanoes. And yet, again and again, however many times this is pointed out to him, right, Ian keeps reporting this straightforward fraud, this fabrication that volcanoes produce more CO2.
Let's hear Ian Plimer respond to that. Do you stand